Okay, I'll prompt you.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Sorry, so this is Journeys in Podcasting. It's an afternoon edition. I believe it's 3 p.m. on the Pacific Coast. I'm in Bogota, where it is 6 p.m. Very excited today to talk to Michael Hernandez, who I have seen speak at South by Southwest before. Very inspiring stuff. Michael, I'm going to let you introduce yourself with the first question because I know we have limited time. So I'm going to talk really fast and just throw some questions at you. So the first question is from your when I was looking at your bio page, I really was interested in this part where you wrote, I moved to Los Angeles to earn my MFA in film production from Loyola Marymount University because what I really wanted to do was to be a director. After completing my MFA, I landed a job teaching cinematic arts and broadcast journalism and fell in love with teaching. In the podcast I had earlier this week, we talked about teacher training, and I quoted Larry Rosenstock, the CEO of High Tech High, where he advises new teachers and says, don't think that you have to be anyone other than yourself. There is something you have to offer. Kids don't need everyone to be exactly the same. And if you have a particular strength like music or art, use it. Don't be afraid of it. Having read through some of your publishings and having seen you speak at South by Southwest a couple of years ago, I see you're offering something to teachers that's not just to media teachers, but you're offering a more holistic approach to literacy itself. And this is what I hope that we can talk about a little bit in this session. So continuing from our last podcast, what is your advice for new teachers?
I mean, there's so much advice for new teachers. I remember when I started, I felt like I had to prove myself to my students, the parents, other colleagues, particularly because I taught an elective class, but, just not really having my legs or having developed my own sort of persona yet as a teacher. And so I think we get bogged down by mechanics, by classroom management. And I think one of the key things, I guess, that I figured out is probably that, probably hear this from everybody in business and everywhere else, but it always comes back to people. And so it comes back to relationships that you build with your students, and the trust that you earn from them. As much as I struggle to expect trust, expect respect from them, that is all earned. And so I think you earn respect and you earn trust from your students when you meet them where they are, that you treat them as human beings. And I'm teaching high school, and I think back to when I was in high school. What was it like when I worked with other teachers, and how did they talk to me? Did they talk down to me, or did they talk to me like an equal, even though I knew that they were, older and more mature and wiser than I was? And so can we treat them as regular humans, and understand that they have all kinds of pressures in their lives, and that while our class, of course, is the most important thing in the day for our students, in our minds, it's actually not. And so having that sense of context and understanding that there's a lot of things going on, and not that we're making exceptions for them, but just kind of have that empathy with them, I think is really important. And as far as like the curriculum itself, again, thinking that everything is interconnected. And so what's happening in the math class or the science class should be overlapping with my class. And we don't always see it that way. And the testing system clearly does not see it that way. But, I think about like the writing assignments and the projects that I have for doing films or documentaries or journalism. There's a lot of writing that's involved, and that overlaps with the language arts classes. And the kids have to do sometimes statistical analysis when they do a news story or a documentary, and that overlaps with math class. And how can some of the skills that I'm teaching be of value and a benefit to the students in their science class or their history class? And I think if we start to understand that we are one of the threads in the fabric of the education system, it'll help us be able to work better and see the connections that we should all be exploring and exploiting and acknowledging and enhancing. So I'm not sure if that's a concise answer to your question, but
yeah, no, it brings me right into an article that you wrote, or a blog post you wrote in 2016. And I hate to get political right off the bat, but this really hit like it was written yesterday. So the article is called How the American Education System Elected Trump. And you wrote, how could a racist, misogynist bully who denies science get elected to the world's most important democracy? How could people who stand to lose the most in a conservative government vote for that conservative government? I'm not sure I said that correctly. But then what I immediately thought of was that this lid has been lifted before, at least in my eyes it has, that Katrina hit New Orleans, exposing a city long neglected, where social support structures were as decrepit as the levees that kept out the flooding. We're largely an illiterate society, I think. I mean, people can read and write, but we're mostly media illiterate. He whose name shall not be said has exposed just that. I mean, he just tweeted 50 times last weekend. What will it take to convince people that decoding text is not enough and that we have to decode our whole media environments as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally stand by that very strong political statement that I wrote on that Medium article. In the 2 years since, 2.5 years since, I've had a little bit more nuanced understanding of what took place, if I can ever wrap my head around it. And like many major changes in society or upheavals, I think it's based on the pressure building and not being addressed. I mean, you see this with like white supremacist shooting sprees in New Zealand or in, South Carolina, or you name it. I think there's a lot of problems that have been festering in society for a long time, and we haven't acknowledged them. And so people act out. It's just the way of the world. And I think this is one of the ways people were just angry that, across the political spectrum, across the economic spectrum and scale, people felt disadvantaged. And there's a huge, gap between rich and poor, healthcare costs, disenfranchisement from education and college, and an opportunity. And you have all these major changes happening rapidly in society. Like, oh my gosh, in the United States, gay people can get married. We can have a Black president. And in other places in the world, there's mass migrations. Or, in South America, there's countries right now that are very unstabilized. And so when that happens, people, I think, tend to gravitate towards a strong leader. And they don't look for subtleties and they don't look for nuance. They're just scared, angry, and rightfully so. And so the article that I wrote, I think, was sort of my slice of that pie, trying to figure out how can we have people that avoid nuance? How do we raise and educate a population that denies science or logic or reason or straight up fact when we know it to be true? And that reflection, I think it came back to in my small, tiny little understanding of how education works and the influence that I can have is, you think about a traditional classroom, it's very much a fascistic system, right? You're in rows, you are ranked, you win or you lose, meaning you pass a test or you don't. You've got a strong leader at the front of the room who has all the answers, and if you go against them, you get punished, right? And so we know historically that the current education system as it exists in the US anyway, was created by former military leaders to train the citizens to be, cogs in the industrial complex and the Industrial Revolution. So the downside to that is we raise kids who are not encouraged to question. We think that there's only one right answer instead of multiple right answers. There's little collaboration that happens typically. We don't get to listen to multiple perspectives. We don't allow too many opportunities for the students to have to exercise those muscles in their mind and in their heart about where to find good information that's reliable, because it's always handed to them. It's handed to them in a textbook that's been vetted by whoever vets those textbooks, the textbook companies or the politicians who buy them, and also get kickbacks in some cases, whether that's, they're wined and dined and like, okay, we're going to buy this textbook for us. Or, maybe it's a teacher or a school board that has a certain, agenda or time frame or budget. And so, there's inherent biases in that. And so I think that's what I mean when I wrote that article, is that because our system of education in most situations in the United States, not all of them, but in many situations, we're set up for wanting a strong leader. We're set up for not being able to make up our own minds and our own decisions. When do we teach that? And I think we get caught up in the curriculum and the facts and the statistics of what's in the textbook and what I guess is expected of us as teachers, when probably the most important skills that we can teach kids is how to be a free thinker and how to find information, and how do we know if the information is true or not. Because facts and statistics will continuously evolve and change. Science is new. History keeps being made. We encounter new people or phenomenon all the time. It's not set in stone. And so you can't teach our students as if the world doesn't change. We have to teach our kids to learn to adapt and to live in a dynamic world where nothing will remain the same, and it's changing rapidly. So that's probably the most important skill, because the answer's in your pocket. You can find pretty good information online somewhere. You don't have to memorize it. But what are the skills that we can teach or should teach, since we know those knowledge sets and information and the world keeps changing, is how to make sense of that information and what to do with it once we have it.
So overlapping a bit with what you just said and connecting to how you began with this idea of a human-centered design to learning, in that same article you wrote, when educators are forced to teach a script, we fail to create a culture of subtlety, of creativity, and individuality, and instead prepare our students to act like factory workers, unable to think independently. Sorry for repeating basically what you just said, but my comment is that we're working in international schools after working in public schools in Texas and volunteering abroad before that. These were once places that you could really develop as a creative educator. Now, over the last, say, 15, 20 years, standardization, literacy programs, and more quantitative data than should ever be collected on a child have become the order of the day. Personally, I see a breakdown in our human-centered design of learning. When you're Secretary of Education in 2020, what are your first initiatives?
I didn't know I had that as my career path, but okay. Yeah, I mean, I think we need to have. Oh, that's a big question. What would I do?
Well, maybe just approach it through kind of how you were talking about things becoming more standardized, and how teachers are increasingly put in this position to produce quantitative data. At least that's my perspective.
Yeah.
And that kind of dehumanizes this human relationship when we constantly have to be thinking of everything as, we try to make it more dynamic by creating rubrics of learning, but then we immediately have to put quantitative data on them. And so that it all becomes this kind of the currency of education becomes this numerical grade. Mm-hmm. I might also equate that with, this kind of larger look at literacy, which is kind of the theme we started on, is that we get very fascinated, especially with language and children, which is more of what my specialty has been, and like breaking apart language into its smallest numerically measurable parts. But language is so much bigger. And so if you start talking about adding things like multimodality of our tech tools, or even using just improv theater, or using drawing in the classroom, sketchnoting, things like this, these they get a little nod as like something interesting in the class, but that's not really the criteria of how you're measured as a teacher. It always comes back to that kind of that quantitative element.
Yeah, and I think, learning is messy. And humans are messy, and nothing can fit into a box, and nothing is a formula. As much as we want it to be a formula or be able to assign a value to things. I mean, what's the value in a poem? What's the value in Martin Luther King's speech that he gives? Standardized tests aren't equipped for that. And I think part of the problem is that we're overwhelmed. We don't give enough time and resources to sitting down and working with students who are all unique individuals. We try to assume that everyone is the same. And because we just don't have the time or the money, or we haven't put in the time or the money to allow for nuance. And when you try to make everybody equal, there are people that don't fit that box. There might be a larger amount that do, or a majority, but they're going to have the edges of that curve that don't quite fit in. Yeah, the quantifying piece is disheartening. Also, I think there are a lot of other issues related to it. It's all, society and business and economics all kind of fit together. So, I call it the education industrial complex. You've got the textbook industries, you've got the College Board, you've got universities, and all of the related, people who are profiting off of this, test prep take schools and publishing books to, I'm looking at one in my classroom right now, how to prep for the ACT. People are making money off of this industry. And if we took all those resources and invested those into quality teachers, into the training, into the time it takes to do the job right, into investment in creativity, because I think teaching is a creative act. We interact with people, and we have to sculpt and create these dynamic lessons that are going to resonate on a human scale, not a machine scale, not a business scale. It takes time, and it's not easily quantifiable.
So what about this new player in this edu corporate industrial complex? Ed tech, I'm sure you were an enthusiast and continue to be an enthusiast if you're in media literacy, as many of us are. I mean, I immediately saw when these things were coming into the classroom, I was like, bring more of this stuff. Like, look what it's doing to learning. It's amazing. And yet now we're sort of in this hangover period where we realize that, whoa, these are businesses. They have their own vested interest. They have their own reason to want to get into schools as quickly as possible. So you wrote in the same article, you say, when we cling to 1970s technology of whiteboards and overhead projectors and don't truly embrace technology as an innovative learning tool, we fail to teach media literacy as a vital skill for all members of a contemporary society and as a means for success in the workplace. For me, technology has been kind of the 2019 echo chamber so far, but I don't mean technology like just as digital technology, but encompassing everything that's considered a tool in a learning environment, from thinking moves to language used to physical space to proxemics of how we teach and how far away students are, to the social construction that goes on in that space. And yeah, digital tools are part of that as well. What do you see as far as pros and cons? Why hasn't ed tech fulfilled the promise that 8 years ago we were all kind of bringing these tools into the school?
Yeah, I mean, I think the mindset is that everybody was looking for a silver bullet. Teachers were looking for a silver bullet. And the fact of the matter is they're just tools, just like a whiteboard and just like an overhead projector. If you've got a bad teacher or a teacher who hasn't been trained or supported, if you don't give kids enough time or you give them engaging lessons, it doesn't matter what tool you've got. It doesn't matter how much money you throw at it with equipment. It's how you use them. And I think a lot of, I'm from the Los Angeles area, and LA Unified had the big debacle of spending all this money on iPads. And it wasn't that the iPad was a problem. The IT department at LA Unified wasn't equipped to handle it or understand how to use it. The textbook companies that said they were going to support it with all the content never delivered. And so you had, then they had infrastructure issues, which again goes back to their IT department. And so I think it's really easy for us to look for scapegoats, like let's blame screen time, and let's blame Facebook, and let's blame, whoever. But at the back end of it are human beings. Like, we choose to use this tool ourselves. We make choices about how we handle it. We make choices about, are we going to support our teachers and actually train them how to use it? Or is it just going to be a substitution device of, instead of a whiteboard, you've got this more expensive, electronic version of a whiteboard? Or are you actually going to use it to transform your learning? And I think those are the things that people were afraid to tackle, is that the tools could offer the opportunity to transform learning, and not everyone understood that or how to get there. And some people were just actively against it. So I would always be hesitant to blame a technology for, something working or not working, because in the end, there are humans who are making choices about how to use that technology. And whether it's something obnoxious on social media, or that somebody posts, like, I don't know, a president of a certain country, whether it's, you can blame, oh, white supremacists are posting these things online. Yeah, they're doing that, and that's terrible. But you don't take down the internet, and it's not going away. And you can't put your head in the sand, because the kids are going to leave your classroom, whether that's at lunchtime today, or on the weekend, or once they graduate from school, and they will have to use these tools. And so literacy means media literacy. You can't escape it, and it's only up to us to teach them how to use it. I don't know if I'm answering your question or not. Maybe your question was more about people profiting off of.
Open-ended, so I wasn't trying to lead you any particular way. I just kind of wanted to pick your brain, your thoughts on that, just because I know that a lot of ed tech people, or former ed tech people, or a lot of people came into it. I worked in a school with very little tech, and we were literally like bringing in overhead projectors for the first time. And how does using imagery change the way you teach? So taking kind of like small incremental steps like that was a great advantage in looking at how tool affects kind of whole learning system. How are you on time? Because I know that you have constraints.
I have a little bit more time. Do you want me to finish? You want me to round out that that question that you just asked?
Yeah, keep going. And then I have other questions, so I'll keep you as long as I can.
Okay. So I think, were you going to get at, like, were you wondering about the tech companies coming and profiting off of schools, or?
Well, that is another bigger concern, is just sort of like, data privacy, biometric data, all these kind of things. As we so enthusiastically bring in, whole Google platforms, and then all of a sudden we realize, like, oh, well, Google has this whole other corporate, tangent as well, that they, how much is this ed tech stuff protected from that? There's other bigger questions for me, just like, you mentioned the LA iPad debacle, because that was something we were watching. We were bringing in iPads at the exact same time. And then as that started crumbling, we're getting our new shipments of iPads. And we're like, oh no, if this is like the precedent, we have to do better than this. And I also looked, kind of behind the scenes of that, and saw that, LA school district is not, I know you have great schools, but I also know there's a lot of experimental things that are sometimes not exactly beneficial to learning, like ranking teachers according to standardized testing. I know that, like, elementary school teachers were literally put on a ranking system. I use this in my data and learning class, where you could look up a teacher and you could rank them according to all of the other teachers in the district. Wow. Regardless of like what district they're teaching in, what the makeup is, how many of those kids speak English, like, there's a lot of other factors in there. Sorry, I'm straying you from the path.
As far as the technology pieces, I mean, everybody wants something for nothing, whether you're a private citizen or whether you're a school. And if somebody offers you a free service, you jump on it because you've got a limited budget. But there's no such thing as a free lunch. You're always paying for it somehow, some way. I remember back in the day, we used to have to buy Netscape Navigator. Right? It was like $30 to buy that. And now you have free browsers. Well, what's the hidden cost? Where is that? Someone's tracking what you buy and what you click on. So, you pay one way or the other. It's a matter of values. It's a matter of choices. It's a matter of policy and legislation. And it's a matter of having vision. And if you care about your privacy, then you will, create legislation and encourage that type of development. And if you want it to be a free-for-all, then you take what comes with that.
So, I mean, I know, like, Google applications for education, for example, offer a lot of things that make a teacher's life just easier. And I think that's all wonderful. All the asynchronous, synchronous participation going on, all the different ways you can collect, student work. You work in more creative technologies, which I think is the real, like, when I looked at an iPad and I looked at what a MacBook can do in a classroom, what a projector and an Apple TV can do with that, like, these are the more exciting things to me. I was like, oh, we can we can actually be seeing kids in their learning trajectory, and we can see all these different sides of it. All the different ways we can use modalities and language development. This creative side to the technologies was what I was most excited about. And I feel like it's the hardest thing to get teachers to actually adopt. What are your thoughts there?
Absolutely. I think people don't understand how to use creativity because they haven't been trained how to use it. They don't know what's possible. And I would caution everybody in thinking that there are creative classes and there are classes that are not creative. I think every class is creative and has the potential for a lot of creativity. I was just working with the science department chair who teaches AP chemistry at my school. And I helped her to develop a project for her students, her AP students, to create explainer videos. So basically, instead of a report that the students would type out or a class presentation, which is boring and nobody cares about and is a dead end, they created videos using Keynote to use animation and text and video and images to explain concepts in chemistry. And so when you do that, you're not only checking for knowledge and understanding, you're also integrating skills like public speaking, writing and story structure, graphic design, visual literacy. And then in the end, you have an artifact that you can then share with the world. So it doesn't become what we call dumpster projects. Like you don't just create it and then the teacher throws it into the trash can when it's done being graded. And so then we can use those artifacts to teach the younger students, right? And not that the teacher is being lazy, but you have this artifact that will help other people in their learning, and you sort of amplify the learning that way. So, that's a science class. Who thinks that there's creativity in science? But there is. And I was talking to my friends, a friend of mine in Texas who does some amazing things with math. And, there's many ways that we can exploit it. I think, again, if we put ourselves into these silos and think that we're not interconnected, that's when we have, we're missing a lot of opportunities for learning. And we're missing opportunities to teach our students that everything is interconnected and you must have a connection. Like, we don't do a good enough job, I think, in the education system showing students the purpose behind the learning. We're like, you have to memorize this because I said so, or because it's on the test, or if you want to graduate, you've got to know this. That doesn't carry any weight with anybody. I mean, go to a faculty meeting. Why am I here listening to the principal or superintendent talk? Tell me why this is important and why I shouldn't be on my phone checking my email or my social media account. What's the purpose behind it? And so when you use those creativity tools to let students show what they know, to maybe collaborate with other students in other parts of the world, you couldn't do that on paper with a whiteboard or an overhead projector. It carries more weight. It makes more connection, power, and the purpose behind it. And it opens up a lot of opportunities that I think that we often miss in the standard education system right now.
I feel like you're talking a lot off of the Sammer model of the substitute. Yeah. And I like that model, but I kind of don't like that it is overused, and there's a lot of ways to talk about new tools coming into the classroom. I think it's a great way to kind of pick apart and get conversations going, but not necessarily an endpoint. So in another article you wrote that also hit me was, this one's called "What I Teach Doesn't Matter and Other Truths," and this gets more of that idea of what you're talking about, of that learning is a construct. Let me start with a political question, because I thought this was pretty eye-opening, and the things you link into your writings are also very eye-opening. So if anyone's interested, check these out. So you wrote, "If we teach our students to question long-held beliefs or hold those who are in power accountable to their actions, suddenly we're labeled controversial and added to a watch list to be potentially targeted for retribution by conservative reactionaries." Then you leak in the professor watch list. Your published writing and blog stemmed straight out of thought of John Dewey, of schools as vehicle for democracy, and the education praxis of Paulo Freire, who taught sugarcane workers to read in 45 days and then went on to create community learning centers. Somewhere behind these two minds is the inspiration from phenomenology of mind connected to environment. And to truly teach students to critically think through their mediascape that surrounds them is really to take a personal risk of you as an educator. What has that been like for you? Have you ever felt at risk? Are you ever afraid of getting put on one of these troll watch lists?
That's a great question. I don't know that I'm famous enough and have enough of a splash to be on someone's troll list, although I have gotten some odd comments on social media. But yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, I'm a person who likes to get along with other people, but at the same time, I'm very passionate. And if you don't stand up for what you know is right, or what you're observing or witnessing in your classroom, who will? And again, that again came to light after the 2016 presidential elections in the States, is if you don't stand up for what you believe in, people will think you're going along with whatever's happening. Are you going along with the education industrial complex? Are you going along with standardized testing? Are you going along with the cliched tropes of technology is bad, we have to go back to basics, you know? Or do you have some other way? And can you add in a constructive way, not in a destructive way or a, you know, something that tears down other people, but can you stand up for what you believe in? If you're pretty sure that you know it's right, or at the very least, I'm noticing these problems or I'm having these difficulties, let's figure it out. And so I feel it's important to, in that article I was talking about, what I teach isn't important. For a lot of people, that's offensive, maybe because they care very passionately about their subject area and they've done a lot of research and put a lot of time into it and maybe have advanced degrees in that. But I think the point of that article was that, again, ultimately, you know, I have to be humble enough to understand that not all of my students are going to go off to become journalists or filmmakers, and that's totally fine. And what I need to realize is that what can I add of value to their lives once they leave me? What will they take away? What will they keep with them that's going to help them in their future? And for me, that means critical thinking. It means collaboration. It means thinking for themselves. It means time management. It means solving problems. It means knowing that you don't always have the right answer and there's multiple answers, that there are people that are smarter than you and it might not be your teacher. Chances are it's not. I'm definitely not the smartest person in the room. So I think we have to have that mindset that when I say what I teach doesn't matter, it matters that you teach, but what you're teaching are, I'll call them hard skills that aren't just a set of memorized facts or formulas.
Yeah, so this idea of leaving the space for this construct, this mental construct, at the same time that you're creating media constructs, so creating real artifacts. You wrote, if teaching our students to be free thinkers and empathetic citizens can be labeled as controversial, then we don't truly believe in education or a democratic society to protect, to serve, to understand. Oh, sorry, that was the link you put in. You put in a really beautiful example of this. So I've seen that recently education cuts are on the president's proposals. And of course, why would he want a more educated populace? You linked in here the Protect, Serve, and Understand project, where improv theater is used between police officers and community members in New York City. Beautiful thing. My question is a little tangential. It's more about this idea of creating this experience at the same time that you're creating media creations. You lead trips, I believe, of students to Cuba, to Vietnam, and have students publish podcasts, videocasts. How do you make sure that experience provides the space for a construct and understanding within the media production? So it's kind of referring to what you were just talking about, of you want to focus on these soft skills at the same time that you're actually teaching real technical skills of how to make a video at the same time. How do you make sure that there's actually like like if you go to a Cuba, that there's a processing of what's going on there, that they're not just documenting, reporting. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. So I like to call it invisible learning, where you work on a project and there's a goal or a challenge in mind, and the kids, you know, sprint to finish that project. And they're so passionate about it and they care enough about that end product that they don't realize all of the other things that they're learning along the way. So for example, in my journalism class, they'll have an assignment to cover a topic. Let's say it's climate change, or they're doing a story about solar panels. And they know that they have to create a story of a certain length and have certain technical requirements and all of that. But along the way, they're learning all these other things about climate change and politics and how the energy system works, the energy grid, and policies that are in place. I don't teach science. I don't teach anything related to that. But in that particular case, they're learning all of these really valuable ideas without realizing it. And so I guess the idea is, can we sort of Jedi mind trick our students into thinking that we give you this challenge, go off and do it, and in the meantime, you're going to backfill and support with all of this really important information that you really want them to learn. And I think that's the thing too, especially in the creative classes and courses, is that I think a lot of people don't understand that it's not about the technique or the tools. It's about the story. It's about the message and the meaning. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. They think it's about memorizing this or taking this test or getting this score. It's not about that. It's like, how do you understand the world? And to go back to the examples, I take students on these trips. We just got back from Cambodia a few weeks ago, and it was profoundly moving for my students. We went to the Landmine Museum, and we didn't realize that we dropped more bombs on Cambodia than we did in Japan in World War II. And all of these things that, they understand Buddhism because we got to explore that. And we met with a Catholic nun who ran this place. And one of the students shifted his story from, I'm going to talk about art and culture, to, wow, this is amazing. These people had their legs blown off by a landmine, and they have the wherewithal to not be bitter, but to make something productive out of it and make a policy at the United Nations. And so he turned his story into one about forgiveness and what does it mean to have justice, right? And there is no answer to those things, but the fact that he's thinking about it and working on it and wrestling on it through the form of this documentary, right, is something that I could never teach sitting in a desk. And there's no way you could do it in a textbook. You have to look the people in the eye. You have to go to the place. You have to collect and gather and experience all of these facts and this information and try to put it together in a way that's going to make sense for your audience. But before you do that, you have to have it make sense in your own head, right? And so that important learning happens only through the experience, not through, having the information projected at you from a teacher at the front of the room, and not by reading a boring piece of text in a textbook. It has no meaning. And then I'd say the other end of it too is, once that artifact is created, it's born out into the world, and it takes on this life of its own. And a few years ago, I had a student create a documentary when we were in Cuba, and she posted it on her personal YouTube account. And she came back one day and she goes, "Oh my God, Mr. Hernandez, somebody left these comments, and I don't know what to do." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And your mind goes there. You're like, "Oh, and let me think of the worst. It's a troll or something like that," right? Turns out it was a resident of Cuba who had seen her documentary and slammed her because she came in with this, privileged American mindset and the way she was talking in her documentary, even though she was a very thoughtful, caring young woman. She missed a lot, and he pointed that out to her in the comments section on her video on YouTube. And so they ended up having a conversation in the comments section, and she could have explained what she was doing, where she was coming from. He explained where he was coming from and what she missed. And that really elevated her learning so much. And that could only have happened if you had an authentic artifact and we allowed her to publish it for the world to see. If it was like, I was afraid and paranoid that something bad is going to happen to this girl if she puts anything out on social media, right? Then she never would have understood truly the extent of her work, the impact that it could have on an audience beyond the classroom. I mean, there's like an infinite number of things that she learned in that experience that you could only learn from an experience.
So this is not just about situating students in these environments where the environment's teaching them, but I guess about learning strategy itself. You talk about why not make our classes 100% passion projects. Imagine the commitment level if we reframed our curriculum in ways that were meaningful to our kids. Yes, 1,000 times. I've seen this in action, labs full of students, everyone working around a deadline, everyone on their own trajectory, some in team, some individual, all critiquing each other. The way that John Seeley Brown talks about as situated cognition and legitimate peripheral participation. That's what we want in our classroom collaboratories, to reflect in our design around a philosophy of learning that affords cooperative goals, student-driven inquiry, and product trajectories that may look quite differently one student to another. How do you plan and design for that part of, here we are, a classroom of kids or a community of kids on a trip to Cambodia, and how do you take advantage of that to make sure that everyone's kind of getting to co-construct and or work on their own thing or
Yeah, that's a big challenge. And I just want to preface this by saying that I realize the reality is that not everybody is motivated to learn at different stages in their life, or particularly about a project that you're doing or a place that you're going. So I'm not like completely out of touch with the reality. But what can we do is to try to frame it with your classroom culture. First of all, why are we doing this? What's happening here? And then I would also rely on colleagues, if you have access to them, to collaborate and bring in sort of their expertise and their perspective, because there's plenty of times like your personality doesn't quite mesh with a student, and they might resonate more with someone else's personality or style of teaching or talking or framing it for them. And so again, just like every kid is unique, we need to also support them in unique ways too. But yeah, I think if we can frame it of, let's also bring the students in and ask them what they want to learn. And I know when I say that, it comes out of my mouth, it sounds like you can do whatever you want. Like I swear I'm not a hippie from California. I'm just like, we have to carefully construct it, and within the framework of our scaffold system of curriculum that we want to have the students learn and encourage them to, within that carefully constructed, carefully thought out sandbox, let's call it, or collaboratory, as he said in his article, let's allow some wiggle room and some flexibility in how the students are going to approach it. What aspect of this do you want to explore? And how will you explore it? So for example, I give one of my assignments is my introduction cinema class. The students learn to make a public service announcement, those little 30 or 60-second videos that encourage people to change the way that they think or act in society, like anti-bullying or anti-smoking campaigns, things like that. So I would give them a challenge and say, okay, this time I want it to be about climate change. You guys go research climate change. We're going to learn research skills. You're going to come back with this annotated bibliography. And then you're going to say what stood out to you, what resonated with you personally. And then you call that out and go, okay, that's what your story should be about. Now, how are we going to approach that? What's the best way to work with an audience? And then we learn how to do advertising, and we learn how to like Jedi mind trick the audience and convince them of something. And we see a bunch of examples, and then you give them the tools and support them, and then they kind of go off in that direction. So within that framework of, this is the content area that I want to explore, I'm going to give you guys some flexibility in choosing which direction you're going to go. And then in the end, it's carefully structured, but there's flexibility, and the students get to choose it, and they get to be passionate about it, hopefully. And they get to explore it in ways that that best suit them.
So in that idea of decoding media, because you're basically teaching them to deconstruct the media, to recognize the signs, the mythologies underneath, maybe even their cognitive biases that they're responding to the media with. And then that, of course, is going to connect into their construction of media, where you really want them to tell their story or work from their passion point. How do you separate those things when you're dealing with media that is really so biased? If you glance around at the media in our mediascape around us, there is so much cultural bias already embedded in there. And so how do you get kids to not be so bombarded by that when they go to construct media, they're like in reaction to it or following along with it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think definitely everybody comes in with their own experiences, like movies that they've seen or formats that they use, whether it's Netflix or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever that happens to be. And so you sort of have that mindset, and you just try to show them as the expert. You pull back to the 30,000 foot level and go, okay, this is the little narrow slice of life that you have, but look at all these other ways. And how might those be really cool to explore? And you can't do the ones that in your head resonated with you back in 1978. You've got to find the examples that are relevant now, or that still have staying power, to show them that there are multiple ways to do it. But I would also, I'm a firm believer in teaching kids how to create media, use media to create messages. Again, keeping in mind that it's a tool only. And at the end, behind all of those tools is a human being who has their own personal agenda and psychological profiles, and we have our needs and wants and fears and desires. And that's going to color and taint everything. I don't think I do a good enough job teaching my kids how to navigate that. I mean, that would be like a psychologist's job, right?
Do you have mental models for breaking that apart? For me, Roland Barthes, like the whole sign mythology signifier thing, is a good mechanism for breaking stuff, or even like the Project Zero thinking moves or the D schools mindsets and methods. They're ways of kind of breaking things apart. You mentioned the zooming effect of pulling back from that, or is this all just developing in a dialectic? How do you get at it?
Yeah, for me, I mean, doing those things probably doesn't resonate with a freshman in high school. So I have to do it as we go. It's like, oh, did you notice this? Or how come this? Or what's another way to, and things like that. So it's more of a, I guess, like you said, a dialectic, a dialogue that happens as we work on the project. So it doesn't seem like it's a separate thing. Oh, now we're going to take a break and learn media literacy. It's like, okay, we're working on this project. Oh, did you notice this? And how come it's working this way? Or why are we having trouble with this? Something that really something that really resonated with me from South by Southwest EDU last year was Dana Boyd's talk on media literacy. And she said that we really don't need to teach media literacy skills because these folks that are creating these crazy messages out there are very media savvy. They're very media literate. And it's not about the tools and it's not about the technique. It's about what do we do with that information once we have it, right? And so her whole focus on that talk was about epistemology. It's the understanding of knowledge. Like, how do we choose to accept something or not? If it's fake and it agrees with our worldview or our experience, we're going to go along with it, even though it might not be true, right? Because the message is crafted in such a way that it works. But I thought that was a really great sort of controversial point. That, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, it's not about the tool. It's not about screen time. It's not about, paranoia of technology being bad. It's what you do with it. And it's that mindset. We've got to get the kids in the mindset that the messages can come from anywhere. It can come from an overhead projector. It can come from the mouth of a teacher at the front of the room. It can come from a kid in the hallway, at lunchtime. Like, what do we do with that information? How do we know that what that person is saying or that message that we see is accurate? And how does that resonate with, contradict, or agree with our own current mental state? And so, again, it's about epistemology. It's about how we understand the world in a variety of ways, not just technology-based or media-based or anything. I mean, this goes back, ages before there was social media or computers or the internet. We still had these same kinds of concerns,
So what about this idea? And that was something I kind of wanted to throw in there too, this idea of the new media literacy. So Dana Boyd published with Henry Jenkins, Participatory Culture, I think was the book. And, the new literacies are basically all of the old literacies just repackaged in a new way, orality coming back, visual form coming back. These were things that in human traditions have been there since cave painting. I feel like this whole media literacy thing is so big that, I was recently talking to some educators in Germany, and they just blanket everything with media literacy, informational technologies, computer literacy. It's all media literacy to them. But I remember even like way back when I was in elementary school, we had kind of like defense against advertising training. And it was like a 1-day workshop. And these people came in, they showed us these pretty slick, commercials that were all fake commercials. And then they would take away all the sound and just have the kids talking to each other. So you could really deconstruct all the manipulative points that are in the advertising. And obviously it stayed with me because I'm still talking about it today. Where do you see the future of media literacy going? I mean, I know you teach the creative arts, informational technologies. I feel like there's so much work to be done out there that all these devices are falling into people's hands. Now we have TVs in everyone's hands. So before it was just like your screen time may have been limited to like an hour a day or something, and now it's 8 hours a day. Where do you see the future of that in schools? Like, I mean, I think journalism, cinema, of course, is super valid as a form of literacy. But what about like just teaching young kids or high school students what to make of the digital landscape that's in front of their face all the time?
Yeah, it has to start with, it's like chicken or the egg, but it has to start with teacher training and preparing folks to become teachers. They have to integrate it into every grade level. So literacy means media literacy. It just means that everything's in electronic form, and we can't pretend that everything is on books, or paper. And so you have to start in kindergarten. What are the images that you're seeing on TV? What do you see on your iPad? What when your mom gives you her phone, or you're looking at a DVD player in the backseat of a car? These are all messages that they're already seeing. And we need to shift our mindset as educators that we need to integrate it into every class. Like language teachers should be teaching media literacy, not the media literacy or technology class that's an elective. Think about how much time you spend teaching kids to read books. Think about that image of a kid, an infant, a child, a toddler in bed, and you do the storybook at night, right? You're sitting there and you're going, okay, I'll look at this picture. What does it mean? And what does this word mean? And can you say this word? That level,
like imagery attached to text, like it's just the helper for the text, as opposed to being like more of a transmedia thing where the images can tell parts of the story that maybe aren't in the text.
Yeah, and that's my point, is we focus so much of our energy and time on words, we haven't spent any time on images, and the world is full of images. And if we spent a fraction of the amount of time that we've spent teaching our kids to read like words on a piece of paper or on a screen, to teaching them how to navigate images and video and what this all means, I think we'd be a lot safer. We'd be a lot better place. But the fact is, most of us don't know how to analyze images or a movie or a social media post, and that's unfortunate because now we're in the situation where we are.
You're far extended your time. I can go another hour if you want.
Yeah, I know. I do have to get going. So,
but no, let's stop there because that's a good launching point. Maybe you could talk a little bit about. I have a couple of questions just about where people can find out more about your work. So if they want to find you online, for example, and then find books or speaking events, or I would love to see more student examples of your student work, if that's anywhere.
Yeah.
Be fascinated if there's any process documentary. That would be even more fascinating. Where would you send people?
Yeah, you can find a lot of information, articles that I've written on my personal website, which is michael-hernandez.net. Also, you can follow me on Instagram, which is changing.the.narrative. And that's really cool. I'm really excited about a new monthly newsletter that I'm sending out via email. And you can subscribe to that on my website. And I have a forthcoming podcast that should be going live in the next few weeks too. I'm very excited about that. And I will share my student work on those social channels as well.
What is the name of your podcast? I would love to key into that.
It is called Change the Narrative. And it's about innovation in education and the workplace.
Great.
And I'm very excited. It's not live yet, but we're in pre-production right now, and we're expected to have this go live in the next few weeks.
Very cool. Michael, we'll disconnect here. If you would just stay on for a minute, I'll stop broadcasting now. Thank you.
You bet.